Welcome to the United on the Fly Warm Water Fishing Tips August 2021 virtual meeting.
Hi, I'm Jenn Hsia. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I have been fly fishing for about 2 years. I'm really passionate about it, and I love to fish for almost anything. If it swims, I will try to catch it.
Hey, I'm Lino, born and raised here in sunny Southern California. Been fly fishing for a very long time. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, and I'm also a species getter. I love anything on the fly also, so it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nome Stark. As you can see, my pronouns are she, her. I am the owner and operator of Predators on the Fly. I've been fly fishing since 2000, started with the troll trout thing, and much like the other two presenters, you quickly get into the multi-species game, and warm water species is definitely on the list.
Okay, so I will be talking about pike on the fly. This is sort of a basic overview. I do have a lot of slides, so I will try to get through everything as quickly but succinctly as possible. And I should definitely just start off by saying I love pike. Pike are fantastic, and if you've never fished for pike, you really should give it a try. Aggressive fish. They are not the smartest fish, so that often means that you have multiple chances to throw your fly back at them, and there's a reasonable chance that they'll actually take it on a third or fourth presentation. And they're hard fighters, but they don't fight for too long, so your arm won't fall off, which is kind of nice. So northern pike, they're freshwater species. They can get pretty large, so up to 40, 50 inches. The big ones are the females, so they're the big mamas. And they can live between 10 to 15 years, even up to 25 years. I happen to think they're very pretty. They have this really beautiful olive green with a white belly, and then they have these little yellow white bars across their flank, and then these dark spots on their fins. So they're hard to mistake for other creatures. So where are pike located? One of the great things about them is they're located in a large variety of water. You can find them in either rivers or lakes, so plenty of opportunities to target them. We'll go to the next slide. So I think the important thing to remember about pike is that they are essentially ambush predators. So when I'm trying to figure out where should I be focusing or where should I fish, what are the likely spots a pike could be in, I'm looking for areas where pike can lay in wait and ambush a bait fish that's happening to go by. So this is basically weeds and structures. You'll probably hear that about every fish in the world, but they like weeds and structure. So pike will typically lie or lurk motionless in the cover of weeds or other structure. They're going to wait for prey to come to them. In my experience, pike don't do a lot of roaming around, so they can stay in one place. And so weed beds are an excellent place to target, as pikes will sit there, they'll wait for that unsuspecting bait fish to fish by or swim by, and then they'll lunge out and try to grab it. So lily pads, milfoil, those are really good places to target in the lakes. With a fly, I'm typically fishing that line. It's hard to get your fly in there deep into weed beds without snagging. So typically the weed line works well for me. If you're looking for them on rivers, there are several areas that I like to target. So in a river, one of my favorite places is to target that slower, swampy, slack-looking water, especially if it's sitting next to faster moving current. So you want to think about maybe a back eddy off the main current, or it just looks swampy and gross. I'm always going to at least give like 2 or 3 casts in there. Mouths of tributary where cooler water is coming in, food can be coming in, drop-offs, rocky points. These are all kind of classic ambush spots that predators are going to lie in. And then submerged trees are another classic spot where pike will be nearby. So if you are thinking about getting into pike fishing, sort of basic equipment I typically recommend anywhere between a 7 or 10 weight single hand rod. I personally fish an 8 weight, that's my favorite. And you can use a floating line, intermediate line, full sink line. You can use all three if you want. And we'll kind of go over each of those in a little bit. I think what's most important of your equipment though, is that you have to have a bite guard. And a bite guard is a length of line that's basically wire tippet or something like 60 to 90 pound fluorocarbon, something that's really thick and abrasion resistance that can resist the sharp teeth of the pike from cutting through it. And then I always will also recommend wire cutters, long pliers, jaw spreaders, and a good net. So for me, I think the rod weight really kind of depends more on the fly that you're throwing, not necessarily the size of the pike that you're fishing. And so as a general rule, if I'm throwing a fly that's anywhere between 2 to 5 inches, I typically am going to throw a 7, 8 weight rod. If it's something bigger, a 6 to 10 inch fly, I might actually fish a 10 weight. And all of this is going to be dependent on your casting ability, your arm strength, your comfort level. There are plenty of people who can throw 6 to 10 inch flies on 8 weights, but I'm not quite that good of a caster yet. So I need a little extra oomph to help me get that out there. And I think almost every question or favorite thing that people want to ask is, what are your favorite flies? Well, that's an easy answer. You go to Predators on the Fly and you get a cool little bait fish pattern like this that will catch you pike. So really, I think that the fly itself is actually not super important. You can catch pike on literally anything. The other day, I caught a 35-inch pike fishing. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's basically this, I don't even know what this is. It's like a shrimpy thing. I was fishing for smallmouth, and this is what I decided to throw on. And this pike just absolutely crushed this fly. So they will eat anything. So you don't have to throw big flies. You should just throw the fly that you're most comfortable with, that you feel confident in fishing, and that I think in general is fun to throw. Because if you're gonna throw something for 2 or 3 hours and it's not fun, you're not gonna have fun. But that being said, of course, we all have our favorite flies. So I'll just go over some real basic ones. This 3M Wildwood Minnow, it's about a 3.5, 4-inch fly. It's made of material that is super light, quick shedding, so it doesn't hold a lot of water. Has a lot of great flash. I think it's easy to fish. It's probably my go-to pike fly. Next screen. Game changers are super popular. And the reason is they work. They're articulated. They have great movement. I don't fish big game changers. I'm typically fishing about a 3-inch game changer. That's what works best for me. But they certainly make bigger ones and smaller ones depending on your personal preference. Some of these more classic flies that are a little bit bigger in that sort of maybe 6-inch to 10-inch range, made of bucktail, have what we call a Buford head, pushes a lot of water, can get good attention from the pike, and they also flat out work. And then occasionally I like to fish for them on the top. This is a howitzer bait fish popper. I think it's supposed to mimic a wounded, dying bait fish that's kind of floating to the top. I have a green one, so it probably looks like a frog. And getting a pike to go top water, always exciting. So so intermediate lines, this is actually the line that I use the most. That's a personal preference. I like a slow sinking line that gets a little bit underneath the surface, but doesn't sink too fast. I feel like I can control that a little better. I can fish a weighted fly or an unweighted fly with an intermediate sink line. So this is the line I'm typically using from late spring to summer. And I'm typically targeting pike either in the early morning or sunset where the weather's, it's just not quite as hot. It's a little bit cooler. I think pike like that a little bit more. When it gets super, super hot, it can be a little bit difficult for them. They're not as aggressive or they're a little bit more lethargic. So I think, so sunset, sunrise fishing, best time for pike. I will do a full sink or sink tip line. Typically, as we move into fall, or if I am going to be fishing during the midday, in my experience, pike tend to go a little bit deeper at these times, so you want to be able to get down a little bit faster. And a floating line is totally a great line to use. I think it's probably the most versatile line. I think if you're going to use this floating line, especially if you're going to be throwing bigger flies, you'll want something with a short, compact head that weight forward, that just is able to deliver a lot of energy to turn over these slightly heavier flies. So something like this Orvis bank shot line or a Rio outbound short. Every fly company has sort of this short, compact headline that works really well. And then if you want to be able to get it down a little bit deeper, you could attach a poly leader and pair with that floating line, and it helps the fly sink a little bit. So if you want to fish a non-weighted fly, this is a good option with a float line. So leaders, just like flies, there's so many ways that you can tie a leader. Everyone has a personal preference. I usually keep things super simple. I don't generally fish super long leaders when I'm fishing for pike. They are not leader shy. They are not tippet shy, and for the most part. So I will fish about a 5 to 7 foot leader. Any longer, I think you're just risking chances of tangling and just having a difficult turnover of your fly. So for me, I use 40-pound nylon or fluorocarbon, about 2.5 feet of that. I blood knot it to 2.5 feet of 25 or 30-pound nylon or fluorocarbon. And then I will tie that to the wire tippet. And I typically use a knottable one. Heather, can you go to full screen real quick? So knottable wire is, it's great because it's flexible. So you can see I can actually turn this around my finger. It doesn't have a ton of memory. You can tie clinch knots, non-slip mono loop knots. You can tie blood knots or Albright knots with this. So this is a good, I think a good option to use. I don't know if people can see that, sorry. It's pretty hard to see, but every brand makes one, Rio, Scientific Anglers. This one's called American Fishing Wire. If you don't want to use wire, like I said, you can use a thicker fluorocarbon. So something in that, I would recommend something in the 60 to 80-pound range personally. And so, as we mentioned before, bite tippet is absolutely necessary because pike are toothy critters. Their teeth are incredibly sharp and they will easily bite through 40 pounds of monofilament. If you're not interested in doing a lot of knots with either big, thick fluorocarbon or this wire guard, a great option, or you change flies a lot, another great option is something called a stay lock snap. And basically you just clinch knot it to the end of your fluorocarbon bite guard or your wire guard. And you just simply unclip it and you can slide the eye of a fly through that. Another one is this quick clip. Nome offers them on her website. I've used these actually, and I like them actually more than the stay lock because they're a lot easier to get your flies on and off. Stay locks can kind of sometimes be very stiff, and they actually hurt my finger to try to get them undone and redone. So these quick clips are a good option too. Simple, same leader, you just add on that quick clip and then attach the fly. So that's just a nice picture of that. So I'm just going to touch on casting a little bit. So in general, your casting with bigger flies is going to be different than the traditional type loop that we would use for like dry fly trout fishing. So in that tight loop, you have a little bit more of a vertical plane or casting stroke. With an oval or Belgium cast, you're typically kind of forming, it's called a constant tension cast. It's a little bit more of an open loop. And the reason why you want to do this cast is that these flies are heavier, your line and leader system is heavier, and it can often collapse when you're trying to cast these in a super tight loop. And you can have your flies collide with your rod tip very often. So we don't want any broken rod tips. And basically, you come, instead of going straight up and down, you come more on a horizontal plane, and then you kind of convert into a vertical plane to deliver. It's not essential, but learning to double haul can also improve your distance. So you've gotten everything, you've picked your fly, you've thrown it out in the water. And as with all streamer fishing, try a variety of retrieves. Every day will be different, whether it's slow, fast, erratic, super long pauses, short little pauses, super long strips. Anything can work. If you're not catching after 20 minutes, switch something up. And then as always, if you feel something on the end of your line, strip set. Try not to trout set. So you've hooked this beautiful pike, and now you've got to get this fly out of its toothy mouth. How are you going to do that? That can actually be the most difficult part of fly fishing for pike or any toothy critters. Pike are extremely slippery. I don't know if anyone's ever caught or smelled a pike. They don't smell super awesome, unfortunately. They are very slimy. They are slippery. They like to jump out of your hands. And then they have really sharp teeth, so you can't put your hand in their mouth to try to remove your fly. You'll probably definitely get bitten. So don't ever put your hand or finger in a pike's mouth. Don't ever lip a pike for that same reason. And the reason why a net can be so helpful is that you can keep your fish in that water while you prepare to unhook this pike. There is one method. It's called a gill plate grab. I'm going to have you, I don't have a pike. I have a Mr. Sharky, so he will represent our toothy critter here. So sharp teeth, don't ever do this. Bad, loose fingers. Each pike, they have what's called a gill plate. So it's just basically this little flap, and it's usually on the undersurface. And this flap is actually, you can actually move it back and forth. And right underneath, when you just basically lift it gently, you'll see the gills. So a gill plate grab is meant to grab this flap of tissue, the plate here. And basically you make your hand like a hook like this. You gently slide up like this, and then you're gonna pinch. And you're actually pinching right here. So not like this, but kind of like this. So you wanna pinch like that. And this will actually control the head of the pike. So then once you're controlling the head, you basically control the fish. What you don't wanna do is put your hands in the gill. So don't do this and then stick your hands here. First, you'll probably kill the fish. Two, these gills have rakers and they're sharp, and so they can cut your knuckles. So don't put your head in the red stuff, just the white stuff. Like I said, once you control the head, you can use a pair of forceps and remove the pike. And actually, sometimes when you gill plate them, they'll actually open their mouths automatically. So as we mentioned, don't put your finger in the gills. That's the biggest key there. If you're not comfortable with a gill plate grab, that's okay. What you will want then is a pair of jaw spreaders. I've got one, something like this, long pliers. So basically you can just gently, we'll go back to Mr. Sharky here, Mr. Sharky. So you can sometimes, depending if you're right or left-handed and your comfort level, I'm right-handed, so I like to hold my instruments in my right hand. You can just gently grab the pike just behind the head, kind of in the neck region, just behind the gills. What you don't want to do is, I've been told this is the Montana handshake, where you grab the pike and you just like squeeze it to death. That we don't want to do that. Just a gentle grab is fine. And then you can get your jaw spreaders in, open the mouth, then you get your clips and get the fly out like that. Don't squeeze them too hard. Don't throw them on the ground and step on their head. I've seen people do that. That's horrible. That's not respecting our fish here. And then lastly, if you can't remove the hook safely, either for your safety or the fish's safety because it's too deep or it's just actually in the gill, the best thing to do is get your heavy wire cutter, cut that hook as close as possible, and then just release the fish. Photography. So this is, I think, is becoming more important as we're realizing that time out of water for any fish species can be detrimental to their health, not just trout. So same with pike, we want to limit their time out of water. When we're taking a picture, we want to support the pike by both its head and its body. Especially if it's a large pike, I try not to hold it completely vertical because it could potentially crush and disrupt their internal organs. Or if you're going to, just be very quick about it. And then you can either gill plate grab them or support the pike just underneath their head. your fingers between the pectoral fins to help control the head, and then support the lower half and get your picture, and then back into the water. And when you're releasing a pike, you may need to revive the fish. Since they are hard fighters, it's like they just ran a sprint for a mile, they're exhausted, and that may take 30 seconds or it may take 5 minutes, and you should really just make sure you don't release the fish until the fish is ready to be released. So you hold on to the tail for support, and then you don't need to move the pike back and forth in the water. That's not necessary. You can just hold them still. And basically, I'll occasionally turn them over to their side. If they don't right themselves, they're not recovered. And so when they're able to do that and they start to move their tail, I think at that point it's okay to let them go. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me. And this presentation I actually do for a local overshop and fly fishing fairs and club one. So I'm happy to share it with you today. And there's a lot of slides as well, and it's normally an hour-long presentation. So I'll fly through it the best I can. But yeah, so we're going to talk carp today. And so carp, for some reason, have always gotten a bad rap. I don't know why, but especially the LA River carp, you know, they're called sewer salmon, toxic tarpon, mud marlin, so many names. And if you look down there in the center there, I call them golden nuggets, because that's really what they are to me. I love carp. I love catching carp. I love the way they look, but they're definitely a precious gem to me. So they seem to be more of a formidable species now that people target all over the world. And I think has a lot to do with social media. But this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about carpology. What I mean by that is I think it's important that with any species you're targeting, you should know a little more about not just what they're eating, but a little more about their anatomy and why things work, biology, physiology of things. We're going to focus more on the behavior in warm water, but I'll touch a little bit on the seasons, all the seasons from winter, spring, summer, and fall. And then we'll talk a little bit about the strike zone, where the fish can see the best. I'll talk about my setups, what rods I like to use. I'll give you a sneak peek into my fly box. We'll talk about the simple rigging systems. I like to keep things super simple. I don't like to be too complicated on the water, because I'm constantly changing flies, and you don't want to deal with that. So I think it's best just to keep rigging simple. And then we'll talk about the plan of attack, where I will show you, talk about specific techniques for catching, like the drag and drop technique, use of indicators. I'll also talk about how to identify a carp in its feeding mode, like a tailing carp or a klooping carp, and then how to land the fish. A little anatomy here and physiology. So I'm not going to talk about everything, but I think the most important ones are the barbels, which are the whiskers for starting from the mouth area. You see like the little whisker area. Those are really important to know about, because barbels have two functions. One is they're taste buds. It's kind of like a tongue, but they're good feelers. So if a carp can't taste something, it will feel for it. If it feels like food, they'll go ahead and consume it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the presentation. But the pectoral fin below that and the pelvic fin, those really, I think, just for information, they actually have taste buds on there. So, which is interesting. Fish can actually taste there. But the lateral line, can't see it because the arrows are a little white there, but right there in the lateral line, that's important. That's like a carp's line of defense there. So for example, you're in the river, you step foot in the water. As soon as your foot hits the water, they can pick up on that vibration. And a lot of fish are this way. And they do that by that lateral line. So they know exactly where you're at in the water and if you're coming closer, and they can retreat. But another important thing to know about that lateral line is the fish's ability to detect pressure changes, that in conjunction with their air bladder. So for example, if you hear on the radio that there's going to be a low pressure system, for example, well, carp can actually detect that change in barometric pressure as well. Why? Because the pressure in the air affects the pressure in the water. And so why that's important is, especially for river carp, is that when the carp sense that there's a storm coming through, for example, in the rivers, they tend to gorge, because they have the LA River becomes very torrent. So places that I'm fished right now will be like 30 feet underwater when the rainstorms come. So those carp will hunker down. And so they'll gorge before the storm comes because they have no idea how long it'll be before that storm passes. So if you hear on the radio, for example, on a Sunday night that Monday or Tuesday there's going to be a rainstorm, call out sick, get to the river and start fishing because that's going to be a really good day. So yeah, so that's what you need to know there. Next slide. Now this is really important because especially when you're casting at a carp. So if you look there, you see the two red lines where the blind spots are. Believe it or not, right in front of the fish's face. You don't want to try to put your fly there because they can't see it. And obviously toward the tail, you don't want to cast there. The best place that a carp can actually see is about 1 to 1.5 lengths in front of their head. So that's when you're casting and you want to get a fly, you want to get it right into that binocular high definition section there. Now off to the sides, peripherally, there's low definition. They can't really see it well, but they can detect movement. So I'll talk about how to get their attention, especially when you're using a bait that you drag on the floor, for example. You want to do some quick twitches just to kind of grab the fish's attention, then it'll spin and kind of get it into the binocular vision. And so knowing where the blind spots are, knowing where how the best they can see is really going to help you when making a cast at a carp. The seasons, we're going to go through each one very quickly. I'll focus more on the summer and fall, obviously. But yeah, we can go to the next slide. So this is winter. This is just last Christmas. This is my friend Dinah and I. We were down at the LA River. We decided to have some fun and dress up. This was literally around right around the 25th. And of course, she catches the monster and I catch that little one in the background. But carp in the wintertime become very lethargic because the water is super cold. What's cool though is that they like to huddle. They huddle together to keep warm. So you'll see pods of these carp just kind of sitting in the current. And what you want to do is you want to get upriver from them, which is what I call force feeding. And you want to send your fly down to them. Just let the fly drift right into their faces and do it over and over until you manage to trick one into taking your fly. And so you want to use weightless flies with an indicator. That's the best way to do it in the wintertime for me. Springtime, my absolute favorite time of the year to get there out on the river because everything comes alive. The picture in the background there, you see some thrashing carp. That's what it looks like when they spawn. Don't bother casting at them because that's what they're just having fun doing their thing. I mean, they're in orgy mode right there. So they're out there doing their spawn. They will have nothing to do with your fly. So, and you don't want to harass them anyway. So when you see carp thrashing in the springtime, just let them do their thing and stay away. There are, however, a lot of big, hungry pre-spawn fish that you can find. And you'll see the picture there, my friend Kesley at Steely Chick. Those are 2 IGFA line class record carp that she caught within a half an hour apart at the LA River a few years back. And so that's why I like, and then at the bottom left corner there, that's me with my largest LA River carp, which is around 18 pounds or so, and all caught in the springtime. So springtime on the rivers are really a great time to be on the water. You want to fish early or late. A lot of algae in the river. Overnight, the algae sort of settles down, and then in the morning when you're there, there's no algae on the surface. But as soon as that sun peeks up over the hill or beyond the trees, all that algae rises to the surface to follow the sun, and then it makes it difficult to cast. So get out there early, and springtime is so fun because you can catch a heck of a lot of fish in the spring. So summertime, and here we are, lots of tailing fish in the summertime. And the pictures you see there, you can see the fish with their head down in the ground and their tail sticking up. They like to go really shallow. And these are fun. This is a really fun time of the year because you can actually sneak up on these fish and put their fly like right in their face and watch them eat it, which is pretty cool. And that's we'll talk about dapping later, and that's a technique you want to use there. And then the pictures to the side, when the fish come up to the surface to eat, in the summertime, there tends to be a lot of foam on the surface, a lot of scum lines. And in that foam, you have ants and mosquitoes and bugs that get trapped in it. And the carp will actually come up and just start to eat looks like they're eating foam, but what they're doing is eating the bugs and stuff inside the foam. And obviously in the summer, you want to fish early because, it's the heat is not good for any species. Luckily, carp can handle they can actually handle the heat pretty well, but you still want to take a picture of the fish in the shade, take your picture and release the fish as quickly as possible. But they are very, very hardy. So that's why they feed in the 100-degree temperature in the really skinny water. They just don't seem to care. They don't seem to mind it. So these pictures here, especially like Andy and Nicole, those were just caught recently. A few years back, I got the chance to fish with Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Perry Lang up there, which was cool. They both hooked up. Adam caught some, but Jimmy unfortunately lost all that he hooked up to. And then my friend Luce caught it like on the first cast, which is great. So you can go to the next slide. Fall, we're still dealing with warm water. And what's interesting about fall is the juveniles from the spring hatch all get big enough to catch. So you have a very good chance of catching a lot of fish, but they're going to be small. And the most fish I caught in one session on the river is 45 carp in one day. But it was the fish averaged from like 5 inches to like 15 inches. So just a lot of fun. And the only problem there is when you're targeting the big ones, because that lateral line I was telling you about, as soon as you step foot in the water, those little ones scurry and they will scare everything away. So it's kind of hard to target them sometimes, but just be patient and you'll get the big ones. On these fish here in the pictures, they were all caught in the fall. All right, what does my setup looks like? I generally go between a 6 weight and a 7 weight. Those are the rods that I use mainly for these carp. And it really doesn't matter how big the fish are. Even they can get up to even 30 pounds and I'll still use a 6 or 7 weight. And I'll talk about the battle part of it later. But what's really important about the setup is I think it's important to always have a reel, invest a little bit more just to get a reel that's smooth and has sealed drags, because the worst thing you can do is drop your reel in the sand, and then your reel is ruined. And it's very easy to drop your reel into the sand. So try to get a one that's sealed. And then floating line across the board is what you want to use. Rio Gold and the Rio Grande is the two my preference in terms of floating line. And then you can adjust your leader accordingly. But generally the fish you're going to be targeting are going to be shallow. So it's important to use a floating line. And then I also do a lot of Tenkara, especially in the summer. And if you're not familiar with Tenkara, basically it's just a stick, string, and a fly. Originated in Japan over 200 years ago. Tenkara is important, especially in the summer, or even with your traditional fly fishing. You want to step up on your leaders and try to land that fish quickly as possible. Getting them in sooner and releasing them sooner is better than playing that fish to exhaustion, especially in the heat. Tenkara is a straight tug of war. There's no reel on it, and but you can present your fly delicately. You don't have to deal with line management because there's no fly line. It's just a straight line directly to the rod. And then you can see in the picture here, he's demonstrating a power curve. That's basically just utilizing the backbone of the rod and letting the tip act as the sort of the drag and to tire the fish. But with Tenkara, you generally can get a fish in pretty quickly, and the battle is fierce in the beginning. But once you get them to that point, you can pretty much get them in pretty quickly. So that's a lot of fun. These are the first point there is the connecting knots. These are the knots that I think you should just YouTube and know. The perfection loop, and that's connecting the fly line to the fly. Your leader to the fly line. If you have a loop-to-loop connection. If you don't, then you want to know how to do an Albright or a nail knot. And then you want to learn how to do small loop knots. Loop knots are very important in terms of allowing your fly to move naturally, but tying a really small one's even better, because for me, the small loop knot, I've had longer ones get caught up in the hook, but the one that's really annoying to me is when the algae gets caught up in between the big loop. I hate that. So if you make smaller knots, less algae gets caught up inside that loop. So those are the ones that you should know. I'll talk a little bit about the simple systems in the next slide, and how to connect mono to fluoro, and then the importance of tippet rings, and then cider systems, use of indicators and whatnot. So this is these are the two methods that I use most of the time. If you see here, starting from left to right on the top diagram, method 1 there, the white there is the fly line, and then most fly lines have a loop at the end of it. You want to learn how to do it, a perfection loop there. And then I use, for the leader portion, I use about 3 to 4 feet in length of a colored mono. Reason why I like it colored is because I want to be able to see it. So it's a way of detecting strikes. You can focus on that portion of it, and you can detect the line moving sideways or even twitching when a fish takes in the fly. And then from there, I'll connect it to a tippet ring, and that's an 1/8 inch, usually around an 1/8 inch tippet ring. And you can just attach those by clinch knots, and then your tippet will be 3 to 6 feet of fluoro connected directly to your fly. This system here is really good because you can just, most of the time, the part that's going to break is the weakest spot, which is the low test line, which is the 3 to 6 feet of fluoro. And then you can just change that piece right there over and over again. You don't have to worry about the mono section. So that makes that really simple and really fast to change when you need to. And then the bottom one, method 2, a lot of times you'll see me using a green eggs and ham fly under an indicator at the river. And I change them so quickly because there's so many snags in the water. I realized that what you want to do is just tie a perfection loop, do one straight 5-foot piece. So generally the rule of thumb is that depending on the depth and the leader length, you want to go 1.5 to 2 times the depth of the river. I just keep it at straight 5 because the deepest point for me is around 4.5 to 5 feet in the sections that I'm fishing at. So that leader will cover all depths. But you'll notice there that strike indicator, and then on the next slide, I'll talk about my favorite one, but you want to attach the indicator right where the loop knot is. And the reason why is when you go to set the hook and you're swinging for the fences, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of the indicators on the market will tend to slide down the line. So if you attach your indicator above the knot to the connection point, and then it won't slide down. My favorite all-time indicator is the Airlocke strike indicator, the one in my hand there, the 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch, you can cast it as if it's not even there, or like it's cork. You go to the 1/2 inch, I'm sorry, the 3/4 to the 1 inch, it's hard to cast. But the 1/2 inch in pink and orange seem to be my favorite color in terms of visibility. And then you don't have to worry about crimping your line. It holds on nicely. It won't crimp the line. And it detects the most subtle of bites. And you see here, carp have rubbery lips. And we're using the green eggs and ham that I tie as size 12 hooks, sometimes 14 even. And you see that, put that little note there, swings are free. So when you see that indicator twitch or move any way, if you think it's a bite, I want you to swing for the fences. The goal is to get that indicator, throw it out of the water and get it behind you. Okay, so you can be swinging all day long. But because carp, as I was talking about before, when they find food on the bottom, they're taking it in and then they're spitting it out once they realize it's fake. And it happens like this. So if you see that strike, you want to set the hook right away, and then that's going to increase the odds of you catching fish. And for me, especially when using egg type patterns like the eggs and ham, I mean, it increased my hook ratio using an indicator. So I know a lot of people frown on using indicators. I have no idea why. I get a lot of heat on Instagram for it. I have no idea why, but indicators really will increase your odds of catching. And then Tenkara, the setup is similar to the traditional, except you have my Tenkara rod is 13.5 feet long. At the end of the Tenkara tip, there's what's called a Lillian, and that's just like a braid material with a knot on it, where you just basically tie on your mono to it, and with a hitch knot, and it'll stay. And then you want to use 9 to 10 feet of a bright material, same thing, tippet ring, and then 3 to 4 feet of 10-pound fluoro. The total length of the leader, I like it to be about 1 foot to 2.5 feet or 2 feet beyond the length of the rod. So that's my Tenkara setup. And then next slide. These are my flies, and you see on the left side, eggs and ham. Green eggs and ham are my favorite. The green, red work really well. Carp can see red very well, and white, a very close second in terms of the color. But the green one is my favorite. What's interesting about that is I used to tie these flies without the chenille tail. And if you look carefully, you can see some chenille tail on the end of it. That chenille tail made all the difference in the world. They just seem to like it better than just a straight egg. So adding that little chenille tail is important. Right in the center there, you see the eggs and ham hybrid. And that's one that with the dumbbell eyes, the bead chain eyes, and that's for dragging on the bottom. But that chenille tail will stick up in the air, and the carp can feel it with those little barbels that I was telling you about. So they'll take it in. And then the nugget bugs there in the end there, that's just, I mean, you could see the rubber legs. I leave them free because those things will move around, and the carp feel that with their tentacles and on their barbels, and they will just suck that fly right in. So flies made like that, especially that's my nugget bug, I call it, and caught a lot of big fish with that one. All right, how to access. Now this is just, I just threw it in here because it's a funny story because there's a spot in the LA River where I take a lot of people, and as we're walking out to the water, I kind of trick them into thinking that we have to go through this long, dark tunnel, but really it's just a joke. But not for Heather. She wanted to go straight in there. She was all for it. It seemed to scare her, but most people have this look on their face like, what? So anyway, once you get to the river, this is what you want to look for. You want to look for tailing fish. Those are, again, the fish that are actually feeding, and you can actually see with their faces down and their tail sticking up, sometimes out of the water. The cloopers are the ones on the surface, and you can use dry flies. Parachute atoms are really a popular fly to use there. And then the cruising fish, I don't really pay attention too much to the cruising fish. I think what's important about there is that you kind of watch them and see where they're going, but I have a hard time catching a fish cruising. I have, but it's a low percentage shot. You want to wait for them to get to where they're going and wait for them to start clooping or tailing, and then start throwing at them. You want to look for bubble trails. That came in black, but bubble trails are important because when you can't see the fish feeding, if you see lines of trails, bubble trails, carp farts, I call them, you can tell which direction they're going because there's no mistake. You'll see the trail of bubbles and which way they're heading. You can kind of pick them off, throw in front of them. Breaching fish, like you see in this picture here. If you see a lot of breaching fish, be patient, stick it out. They are exerting a lot of energy, and they breach for two reasons. One is just to adjust their air bladder, and two, because they like to have fun. They're just having fun breaching, but they exert a lot of energy and they're going to get hungry. So just be patient and stick it out. And then the plan of attack. So dapping, again, dapping is when you can see a fish feeding, you can sneak up on them. You're using a short line. You don't have to cast. You're just dropping that fly a head length in front of them, and just wait for them to see it, and then they'll take it. Now, when you see tailing fish further out and you have to make a cast, what you want to do is you want to cast past the fish. As soon as the fly hits the water, you want to lift your rod tip, drag it toward the fish, and then drop it right into that strike zone that I was talking about. That's called the drag and drop. And most of the time, as soon as the fly hits the water and they see it, the carp will take it. And then we talked a little bit about indicators. That's probably 80% of the time I'm going to be using a strike indicator on a river system. And then the indicator doesn't have to be an airlock. You can also fish a dry hopper, especially in the summer right now. You can do a hopper dropper where you have the floating hopper as your indicator basically, and then below that the eggs and ham. So that's a great deadly combination there. And then force feeding to me is being way up river, letting the indicator drift all the way down river. So if you know a pot of fish is there, get way up river, let the fly. That way you're not spooking them, and you can just do it over and over. You can do a series of reach mends where you don't even cast. You just lift it up, bring that indicator toward you, and then drop it again and let it go over and over until the fish hits. Don't worry about the weight of the rod. So if you're down at the river and all you have is a 5 weight, you can land 20-pound fish on a 5 weight. You just basically have to point the rod at the fish, keep it low, utilize the backbone of the rod. The fish doesn't know a difference between a 5 weight and a 10 weight. But utilize the backbone of that rod and you'll be able to land a fish no problem with a 5 weight. I've even done it with 3 weights. Yeah, just maintain that side pressure, and utilize the backbone of the rod, and yeah, you'll get that fish in pretty quickly like that. And then with Tenkara, this is just a couple of weekends ago. With the Tenkara, you are maintaining that constant pressure with what's called a power curve, and it's basically just letting the bend of the rod, and you'll feel all the force right where your hand is, where the butt of the rod is, and it is a tug of war, and so much fun. And what you're trying to do though to tire that fish out quickly is to get them to come up to the surface and sip air. Once that carp gets to the surface and you see their mouth come out of the water, each time it does that, it's kind of like a gut punch. You know, the air just gets sucked out of them, and then all of a sudden they get tired very quickly. So that's why you see me here in this picture, keeping that rod tip really high. And this particular carp came up so quickly that it jumped out of the water like a bass. But I was able to get this fish in just a matter of a few minutes, just because I was able to pull them out of the water. And it was a big, like a 12-pound fish. So Tenkara is a lot of fun. And this is what it's all about for me. I just love to get out there and introduce folks to fishing. I am not a guide. I love to use guides. I'm totally endorsing guides, but for me, it's the reward and is not in payment, but in just watching the smiles and everyone's faces. And thanks to social media, everyone that I've fished with, I've met on Instagram, and you can just see the smiles on their faces and catching their first carp on the fly. And so if you're ever in the LA area and you want to try something challenging and something unique, don't feel free to reach out. And if our schedules work out, I'll take you down to the river and we'll go catch some carp.
Musky fishing is throughout the year, but the prime time is fall, which we're quickly approaching. So much like the other two presenters, you tend to really fall in love with these species, and that's really what drives you to really go in these directions. I was a trout guide in the East and moved to the Midwest, up at the Eastern UP, and trout just weren't the thing that was readily available. And the water became kind of difficult with lots of anglers, lots of competition. So I was looking for a ready resource that was self-sustaining and where you didn't see anybody else all day, because that's the kind of fishing I much prefer. And musky was it in that area. So that's kind of how I ended up diving into that. And then, of course, you do a really deep dive of information. Musky, the Native American name, translates to an ugly pike, which is pretty funny. Obviously, they prize pike over musky, which Jen will agree with. But they're very similar. So pretty much everything that Jen had to offer you about where they hide and how they typically hunt is exactly similar to pike. There's a few major differences between pike and musky. Pike are actually a cold water fishery, where musky like it a little warmer and can tolerate warmer waters. The other particular things, musky don't have a sticky gelatinous material that goes around their eggs where they just fall to the bottom. So musky's breeding rate is extremely low, where pike does have that sticky substance, and their breeding rate is usually a lot better. And when they're cohabitating in these waters, pike are usually fodder fish for musky. It's just the way it shakes down in that situation. But it's interesting, especially when both of the species are around. And it's really interesting when pike are the apex predator, they act like musky, which is really fascinating. I found that out up in Labrador. So one of the things that I like to do when introducing people to predator fishing, the odds, and it's going to be more of a 10 and 12 weight, because the muskies are so big and aggressive, and they like to go under the boats or really kind of draw down, and they use the full length of their body against your rod. So you need a stiffer rod, meaning the heavier weights, to handle these bigger fish. But do not automatically assume you need a very fast rod. If you are a mid-flex rod person, stick to your casting style. That's the most important thing, or you will wear yourself out prematurely for no really good reason. There's plenty of mid or soft rods in the 10 weight range. I'm a mid flex to a soft rodder. I much prefer those. I have all the power and all the casting ability. You stick a fast rod in my hand and I can't cast worth a to actually have enough endurance for the day when you're casting. So you don't really need, so you don't really cast a 2-foot fly all the time. Mostly the 10 and 12 weight is more engineered towards the size of the fish that you tend to go after. Muskies eat a lot of different things. Here up in Maine, up on the St. Johns River, their primary food source during the summertime is crayfish. There just isn't enough bait fish, so they gorge on crayfish. So it's really important to understand that fishery and what resources are actually available. Not only to understand all the resources, but if you can, try to prioritize those resources by finding out what kind of food value those resources have. If you figure out that you've got like alewives or ciscos or suckers, or like all those tend to be oilier fish, they have higher food value. So that the predators are very good at keying in on prime higher food value. They'll move more and they'll risk more for that because they know there's more of a kinds of things are really helpful. So you really do have to match the hatch, believe it or not. And when they are going crazy, like, you know, the previous slide showed these little tiny gizzard shads. I kind of got this education hard and fast myself one fall. And this is up in the UP where there's huge musky waters. And there's these two older gentlemen who are in a little like 8-foot flatbed bottom boat rowing. Like, I don't know what the heck they think. Maybe they can bait to turn around and catch musky, right? No. They ended up catching three musky that night on that little 1-inch. And I was casting everything I had and didn't have scissors to cut anything down, but quickly realized that that's what they're eating is that little bait, that they wanted the bait and they didn't want anything else and they weren't considering anything else. So there are times when you have to really, during the off times when there aren't big runs, they're more opportunistic. So yeah, they're going to eat all kinds of things. But again, they will pay more attention to that hierarchy of food bait. As I said, 10 to 12 weight rods. I typically use sink tips. Those are my primary rod lines that I like to use. I use what's called a clear tip, which is an intermediate clear sink tip. It's a 30-foot. It's kind of stealthy and very good way to go at fish that have high pressure. Musky actually, and I do believe pike do the same thing. So the patterns that I've seen in the waters that I guided on, they would follow their food. Like I was fortunate enough to be friends with some of the DNR folks who were doing studies, and they were musky and watching their pattern habits in the spring and then when they moved out of the spring area. So they would follow the walleye and other bait fish, you know, like the perch and what have you, whatever was prevalent. They would breed right at the mouths of those rivers where all of those bait fish were running up. Right when muskie are born, they eat zooplankton right away, but very quickly, once they get into that 1-inch size, they start eating fish. And they need the offspring of the bait that they bred near in order to fatten up really quick. So in the springtime, they're following that food to the breeding area. And then the summer grounds, they're moving towards either whatever the predominant food source is. They'll follow that for a while and then just kind of hang out. They're really literally always like around the corner from their food. It could be milling around all the fish and thinking everything's fine. And you just grab one every now and again and say, yep, there's lunch. They're pretty smart and they can hang out. And as long as they keep their distance, the other fish don't seem to mind them too much. Predator flies, what they really need to do, there's a primary action they need to have. What they need to have, which is called a full profile shot on the paws of your strip. So no matter what line you're using, and every big strip that you're pulling, every time you're pausing to grab more line, that fly between the fish and you is going to give a full profile shot so that the predator has a full profile view of this offering. The reason being is pike muskie, they T-bone everything. That's how they hit their prey. They don't have tearing teeth. They don't have the ability to rip or tear. That's not what they do. All they simply do is open up their mouths to like a bill. They grab and hang on and try to suffocate or hold it until it dies. Then they need molly stuff. So they always tend to eat it head first. So also, they also have an anticoagulant around their teeth. So when they do bite down on the prey, they'll try to make them bleed out as well. But that also will happen to you if you get your hands in the business zone. That's another good reason not to put your hands anywhere near it. And you will bleed for quite a while because it takes a while to wear that stuff out. Predator pose. This is something that I like to do to try to help clients really kind of hone in and stay in the game. When you're doing 8 to 10 hours of this of catching, and you only get to see X number of fish within that time frame, you tend to zone out quite a bit, which is great, but you got to be able to keep that A game ready to go, because all of a sudden a log appears and you're like, I don't know what to do. So I would constantly make clients either play Pop Goes the Weasel in their head as they're drawing the fly, and the closer the fly gets to them, making it. So if they could expect the unexpected, they'll be half prepared. Pike and Musky, they pounce so fast. They can eat 4 feet in a flash. They follow the bait 4 feet behind, and then they won't attack until the last minute, and they'll eat that distance up in no time whatsoever. They're just, all of a sudden they're there. When the first time when I was actually trying to fish for them and trying to understand them, I was fishing along a weed line in a lake, which I was 10 feet out from the weed line. So I figured I'd have plenty of time to see this come and go. Pike came, bit, spit, ran, way before I even had a chance to set a speed way up. So it's a very different speed, very different way of fishing, and you've got to be very ready at all times to set the hook. So that was another thing where I ended up developing, when you keep your rod tip in the water 8 to 10 inches at all times, it maintains a very tight connection between your fly and your fly rod, so that there's no slack. And your natural reaction once you see this Mach 1 fish come and hammer your fly is you're going to jerk up, which is actually a good thing, because that'll help you to set the hook. But keeping that rod tip in the water is definitely a great way to have a nice, clean, straight, hard set, because slack is very, very evil. So you definitely want to finish your every single cast with a figure 8. And I've heard, wait, I said, okay, yeah, you go ahead. You're tired. I get it. But trust me, it's going to all of a sudden be there. And within 1 or 2 of the swings, they see the fish and they're like, oh, I should have kept doing it. It's like, yep. 50% of the hookups can happen at that point. A lot of fish follow deep. You can't even see them. You won't see them until the figure 8. The figure 8 is a panic motion of a bait fish when it's caught between the predator and the boat. And you could do this on a dock with a lot of ocean fish. You just get right on the dock and you start making giant figure 8s. You can call a snook up. You can call all kinds of fish up. This is a common thing that bait does when they panic, which is one of the key things why muskies say, okay, this is great. This is perfect. This is easy. You just keep panicking. I'm just going to figure out when I'm going to get you. So your 8s are very important. You want them idealistically to be at least 6 or 8 feet wide. And if you're going to do it parallel to the boat, what you're going to do is be really deep when you're next to the boat. And as you're going away from the boat, rod tip is going to make the fly more shallow. You want to keep it at least a foot under the water. And then when you come back to the boat for the other 8, you want to go deep on the boat side, because that's where it hit. That's going to be able to turn their long bodies around and grab that fly. It's on the 8s. There are other methods that you could do. There's the L, which you can have the fly coming straight in, and you do a hard a hard L to the left or to the right. That's a great movement too, and it will garner good hits for both pike and muskie. And it's very important not to stop moving your fly, because if you do stop moving the fly, the fish will lose interest and go right to the bottom and sulk. And it's very hard to convince them to come back sometimes. So when you're stripping your line in, you're going to strip it all the way in until they're moving my rod. Just as I know I'm getting to this point and I'm in the last strip, I will start the motion so it's seamless and go right into a whole figure 8 and then keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. I do at least 3 to 5 figure 8s before I give up. And I'll even pause between the 4th and 5th, just in case they're just down there considering, not sure. And then I'll twitch the fly, make it look motionless, twitch the fly like it's all of a sudden stunned, or they want easy meals. These are predators. Apex predators don't want it complicated. They don't want it difficult. They want to eat the weak, sick, and lame. That's their primary job, is to clean the genetics of their food resources. A very good purpose for predators, just like sharks as well as an apex predator. It keeps the genetic pool below it clean, all the way down to the zooplankton. When you do catch a muskie, you want to make sure you have a very large net. And this holds true with pike as well. I've seen up in some of the lodges in Labrador, they have really tight nets. What happens is the fish is bent. It's very uncomfortable when it's in the net. It's going to rake the net, cut the net open, and then going to swim away. So the best thing to do is kind of have what I have here is called a playpen. You want it big enough for the fish to rest in. If you give the fish resting time, you have a much better chance of releasing it and unhooking it. Net, the resting time is critical. When you feel your fish is rested enough and it isn't thrashing or anything anymore, then what I like to do is I'll wet my hands and I'll go in and touch the sides of the fish, just the sides, the middle of the body, all the way down to the tail, maybe touch the tail, get it so used to my hands being around it that it doesn't care around it anymore. I knows I'm not there to eat it. If you grab them too much from the back, these are bird of prey. This is exactly what eagles and everything osprey do. They do not like that. That freaks them out. That will make them thrash and go nuts. So it's really smart to do that. If you rest your fish and then you get it used to your hands, they are the most gentle giants in your hands. You can really maneuver and do a lot around these fish. I can like to turn them over sometimes, you know, like just like trout, if you turn it upside down, they get nice and calm. Same thing is true of these guys, exact same thing. So I don't tend to use other tools. What I don't use is the bigger pliers. These tend to be a little rough on flies. They kind of tear my flies apart, and it's really hard to get the angle. They have a little hook. I don't know if you can see that hook. There's a little hook on the end that you circle around the back of the hook of the fly. You grab it, push, turn, and pull, and it comes right out. No fuss, no muss. You don't have to worry about exactly where's all the fibers because it's usually a mouth filled with hair. I have a 20-inch one that I was using on shark, and it worked very well. Do not use boca grippers. These are the worst things ever. So the skin under their mouths, just like ours, is super thin. I mean, we can pinch right through our jaw from the top and bottom. The same is true of pike and musky, and this just pierces a hole. And if you hold the fish up like this with this, don't do that because it's not good for them, but you will break their jaw by holding them, because if they decide to shake, which they will because you're holding them, it's uncomfortable, it's going to split their jaw, which we don't want to do that either. So let's not use those. Let's use these kinder grips. These float, and you can grab and hang on to the mouth. It has a handle where you can put it around your wrist in case they want to do the gator rolls, which they like to do at times. But if you rest your fish enough, they won't want to do that. They'll be pretty quiescent. I found if you rest it and the net is big enough and deep enough so that I can push the fish down in the water. And then once I use those kind grips to grab its chin, the mouth stays wide open on the water line. If you're having the head above water, stay uncomfortable. If you just push them down under the water line so that their gills are here and their mouths are open, it makes it real easy to get out, and they open wide up for you without any force. But you do got to rest longer. They are meaner. So like I have this gray squirrel and red squirrel syndrome going on with the pike and musky. The gray squirrel is more like the musky, where ferocity there. So I give them a little extra time to rest because I've been more by them. I've never been by a musky. Hook cutters, much like Jen said too, are super important. They're for you and the fish in case you need to get them out. There's other kinds of hook removers. There are these fancy little doodads. You slide it on the line and then you go all the way down, and then you just simply push on the back of the hook and then get it out. Whatever tends to float your boat for comfort. The T-grippers for me are the best. I like them the best because I can grab and hold the back of the hook and never let go of it. This is actually a replica. It's not an actual living fish. It's fascinating. It's wonderfully done. It's awesome. It's also a classic example of how to tell the difference between pike and musky, whereas the scales are only halfway up the fish, the face there, the scales. That's an identifying factor besides the sensors underneath the gills, as well as the markings on the sides of the fish. So the replicas are awesome. I would highly recommend if you want a wall hanger, all you do is get some great pictures of your fish. You get some overall measurements of length and girth. And then the replicas are pretty amazing. I mean, that past replica, you could even see bloodlines and stuff under there. That they do an amazing job, and it lasts forever compared to skin mount. Leader setup, I typically do what's called a 20-pound break. So I'll do the fly line and I'll do a 20-pound stub, and then I'll do a loop to loop with an actual 4 foot of my whatever leader material I want. I typically use fluorocarbon at 60 pounds and up. I've lost nice fish on 40. Don't use 40. And then I do much like Jenn too. I do the wire bite, the real wire. I do 30 and so the one misnomer is everybody's very worried at these toothy fish. They're just so vicious. They're just such horrible, nightmarish things. You don't get bit by pike or muskie in the water. I mean, people go swimming in these things all the time. You're not going to be mauled by them as long as you handle them properly and respectfully. I mean, that's the most important thing. And much like what Jenn said too, don't shake the fish, don't rock it. They don't like that. They will bite you for doing that. And in fact, there's plenty of YouTube videos with idiots who've done that, and then they get ripped hands because of it. Best thing to do is hold it by the tail, try to support it mid-body, and let it recoup completely. I typically will hold it in the middle, and then I'll hang on to the tail and I'll jiggle the tail. And if it starts to swim away, then I let it go. But if it won't move from my hands, then obviously it still needs to rest quite a bit more. So this is a nice muskie up in Michigan, up on the guide waters. As you can see the side body there, this is a northern strain. This is not a Great Lakes strain. The Great Lakes strains can get bigger. They can get to about 60 feet. This one typically taps out around 50, 55. But they're decent fish and they're nice dark greens. This one's a clear with very little bar markings, which is nice too. It's the same strain we have here in northern Maine. So that's the quick and dirty.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. And again, huge thank you to Jenn and Lino and Nome. You all are have so much knowledge and so much, you're just incredible anglers, and thank you for just sharing that with everybody. I know that the community is very appreciative, and thank you. I know it was a lot of work and your time is valuable, and we really, really, really appreciate you. So thank you.
Lots of fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stop the share.
I actually have a question for both Lino and Nome. So Lino, what size or what kind of hooks or what brand of hooks do you typically use when you're tying carp flies?
Right. So I typically will use like an Orvis. I'm not sure the exact one, but it's just a straight heavy wire. I guess it would be a dry fly hook, but it's size 12. But it's a heavier wire. Heavier wire is really important because I'm using most of the time 10 and 12 pound fluoro, and it'll straighten the hook otherwise. So, but just a straight dry fly hook would work just fine, or even a heavy wire scud hook would work fine too.
And then I have actually two questions for Nome. So I'm on a musky quest. I haven't caught a musky yet, and so the one question is, do you find that you can get multiple shots at a muskie, or once you get a follow and then they turn away, that's it, you should just move on? Or is it worth giving it 3 or 4 more casts to see if you can get their attention? And
I would always try a second or third time. I can count on one hand how many times I've had one respond to that. Not a lot, but I've had one of the biggest fish I've hooked do that to me, and I was able to get it back to the area and eat on a second cast. And it's very rare, but I wouldn't give up on it. I would still try. I mean, what do you got to lose?
Yep. And then when you're doing a figure 8 and they're coming to the boat side and you see them, like they take their fly, what is your hook set? I've heard many things, like some people just trout set, some people actually hook back towards the tail to really try to drive home the hook. What do you recommend?
You gotta excuse me, it really depends on where they eat and when they eat. I mean, on the figure 8, trout setting is hard. I tend to like more or less in line, so I wait for them So if I'm sweeping on that figure 8, I wait for them to come up and grab it, and then I'll set it that way. That tends to be a good, but it's tricky, more or less. I mean, you have minutes to do everything right, and not even always exactly that amount of time. So it could be a matter of seconds too. You kind of just got to go with your gut instinct with it. Trout setting is not always ideal because you really don't tend to hammer it home. I mean, you've got 3/0 and up hooks. I mean, up to 6/0. So a trout set isn't going to handle it quite as much. I'd say a strip with a side set would be probably your money as a consistency for hook set, I would guess. If that makes sense.
It does, yes.
Okay.
I do.
It sounds complicated.
Yeah, my one brush for the musky, I trout set it, and of course it didn't work. So I'm dying.
It's
inside.
not complicated. The problem is that it's zero room for margin of error in such a tiny little time frame, and that's the complication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lost my mind. I totally didn't know what to do.
Awesome. So we do have one question, Lino, for you.
Okay.
It's from Patrick. Patrick says, what's happening to the carp population on the LA River? It seems like the storms are having a major impact on the upper river. Can you answer
Yeah,
that?
no, definitely. The flows are a lot lower than they are, and we're going through a drought again. And so luckily the treatment plants hold a lot of water, and so that's primarily what you see there, the water that's being treated or held during the rainstorms and then treated and then dumped in, so that there's a steady trickle. But it definitely is in slow mode right now. But I'm hoping for a good storm this year, or good rain this year. Actually, the last time we had a drought, it actually helped the fish. It helped the carp. I mean, the carp, they just seem that they thrive in any condition, and they really tended to stack up in certain areas. So that's the silver lining to the drought, is that the carp were just plentiful in certain areas. Then as soon as we got the storms come through, they kind of disperse and spread out, making them harder to catch. But yeah, the drought definitely does affect the flows in the river. So I'm hoping for a good storm this year, and we need it. We need the cleanup there too, for sure.
Patrick, thank you for sharing your kiddo too. It's always fun to see
my little girl.
Oh, hi. Yeah, the future of fly fishing. That's so awesome. Thank you.
Oh, say hi. Yeah. This is Harper.
Oh, Harper. Oh my gosh, adorable. So
I'm a big fan of Lino. He's a local celebrity here on the river.
Oh, yeah. I know. Lino's amazing. Oh, cool. All right. Well, thank you all. Please check out Predators on the Fly, their website as well. Nome has some pretty amazing things, and even the clips, the quickies, and just so many flies and material and all kinds of stuff. So just supporting small and supporting women-owned is pretty amazing. So please be sure to check that out and connect with everyone, and also connect with United on the Fly as well, and just enjoy the journey. This is a journey, and we're all learning, and we're all going to trout set at some point and miss that fish. That's just fishing, so yeah, thank you again to Lino, Nome, and Jenn. Your time and your just knowledge and your expertise is very valuable, and we are very blessed that you decided to spend the evening with us. So again,
thank you so much.
So
thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Lino.
Right.
Thank you, Nome.
Thanks, guys. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night. It's
Dan.
fun.
Thank you.